In our previous videos, in the playlist linked below the like button, we went over special use airspace, and now we're just looking at other airspace areas. And other airspace areas, generally it's a term referring to the majority of remaining airspace. So this can include a lot of different things. So this would be like local airport advisory, which is LAA, military training routes, MTRs, places that have temporary flight restrictions, so that's TFRs, parachute jump operations, people that use parachutes, published VFR routes, and VFR is visual flight rules, terminal radar service areas, so that would be TRSA, terminal radar service area, national security area, NSA, air defense identification zones, so that's going to be an ADIZ, and this is land and water based, and you need to have a Defense VFR, so a DVFR flight plan. So in air defense identification zones, you shouldn't get too much of a question on this, but air defense identification zones, right, ADIZ, you need a special type of VFR, a defense VFR, to operate in this airspace. You also have flight restricted zones, so FRZs, and that's where you cannot fly. You have wildlife areas, wilderness areas, national parks, and the request for this is to operate 2,000 feet above ground level, so 2,000 feet above the park. However, you're not going to really be able to fly that high, I mean, unless there's, some kind of building or something around you that is around that height. That's like 2,000 feet, right? Because then you can go 400 feet above that. So that's just something to note. This is pretty common knowledge. You can't really fly in wildlife, wilderness, or national park areas. You don't want to disturb anything. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. So this is like marine areas off the coast, and they also require 2,000 feet above ground level if you're wanting to fly. We also have tethered balloons, and these can extend on cables up to 60,000 feet. So those are just some different airspace areas to watch out for. You might not be tested on all of them, but it's just something that you should be aware of. So let's look at a few of them. Local airport advisory, which is LAA, and this basically provides flight service to different aircraft that are in the air. You have MTRs, which are our military training routes. They're used by military aircraft, and routes are established for aircraft below 10,000 feet MSL, and they operate at speeds in excess of over 250 knots. And if 1 knot is approximately 1.5 mile, well, then they're operating in speeds of probably around 300 miles per hour. So you don't really want to mess with that. You want to stay away from military training routes. Routes are given in two ways, IFR, so that's instrument flight rules, and VFR, visual flight rules. And this is denoted with an IR or a VR. So right here, look, we have an IR, and then we have 3 numbers. And there's a difference between 3 numbers and 4 numbers. So military training routes, or MTRs, if they are above 1,500 feet ground level, they have 3 numbers that help them identify. So if they are, again, 1,500 feet and up, they're using 3 numbers. If they are below 1,500 feet AGL, they're going to be identified with 4 numbers. This IR that we have right here is 3 numbers, so it's going to be above 1,500 feet. Now let's look at temporary flight restrictions. These are pretty important. They're done through a notice to airman, or NOTAM, and it starts with flight restrictions, and then after that it's going to include data surrounding it, so like why it's restricted, the location, the effective time period, and so on. Here are some examples of why TFRs can be initiated, and a little bit of background about why TFRs are now much more common. You also have parachute jump aircraft operations. So, people jumping out of airplanes, you gotta watch out for them. You don't want to run into them. We have terminal radar service areas, or TRSAs. We have published VFR routes, and this is where you would use visual flight rules, and it's when you are transitioning between or under complex airspace. So you're using your visual to look around and see things. We also have terminal radar service areas, and it's where pilots can receive additional radar services. Primary airports that use TRSAs are like Class D airspace airports. Other parts of TRSAs, because they're not just with Class D airspace, they control other airspace, normally like Class E airspace. Participation is not mandatory, it's voluntary for terminal radar service areas, but it is still encouraged. Again, not mandatory, it is voluntary. Now we look at the National Security Areas, or NSAs, and NSAs exist when a increased safety measurement is required. So when you need a heightened sense of safety. Flight through our national security areas, or NSAs, may be temporarily prohibited, and it will be shown via a notice to airman, and you're requested to avoid flying through these areas. And so that's going to be it for other airspaces. Next, we're going to look at air traffic control in the National Airspace System. That's going to be in the next video. But so far, we covered national security areas, terminal radar service areas, published VFR routes, parachute jump aircraft operations, temporary flight restrictions and notice to airmen. We did military training routes, MTRs, as well as local airport advisory, LAAs. As always, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below, and I'll be happy, more than happy, to answer them.